I wonder who named it that. Maybe they found gold there or something. No, who named
Eureka, right. Yeah, good point. Right. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good interpretation, because that's where the gold rush was up around there, I think. Yeah, that's pretty good. You want to hear another one? Oh, wait a minute. Did you guys blocked off? Let's see. No, you're not blocked off. You guys can speak. What do you think of that, Eben?
Wow. It's kind of messy, and I think that's very interesting, very bold to just make something kind of a hot mess and be good with it. Also, interesting that these girls had to do something. I don't know if they ever broke off and did things individually. Did they ever do things individually or always as a group?
No, they all died or fucked up. They got one album out, and then I think Frank lost interest in them. They pissed him off, maybe because they got into drugs. And they were just drifting off. The only one who really seemed to hold herself together was Pamela DeBar. I think she kept working at Frank's house as a nanny, and then she married a rock star, Michael DeBar, and so that protected her probably through the 70s. And then she got her book published in the 80s, and then she was on her own from that point. She had a good income. She's put out about 4 books, and they're now saying she's the world's, most famous groupie. And she wasn't even the main groupie in the GTOs. The main one is on the cover of Hot Rats. And, of course, she died a couple of years later. I forget which one she was. But she's the one who had the charisma for that album cover. Hot Rats came out in the fall of '69. Have you ever heard the GTOs before, Roxy? Have you listened to any of them when you were researching?
Yes, they're awful.
No, really, you don't like them. You don't like their music.
No, they're really awful. But they were trying to do more performance art.
Right. Well, this is what Zappa did. He formed Bizarre Records pretty well the same time as the Beatles formed Apple Records, 68 or so. Very close. It's interesting. The Beatles, their big success, of course they're going to start their own label. But no one knew that this guy who didn't have the same economic success started his own label. He started 2 of them, Bizarre and Straight. And who does he present? He presents Wildman Fisher, a fucking raving idiot. He presents Captain Beefheart, who was tough for many people. And he presents the GTOs and maybe a Lord Buckley album and Alice Cooper's first album. And but basically it was extremely ridiculous, eccentric stuff. He said, I was not trying to, make a lot of money. I wanted to show journalistically what was happening in Los Angeles or around wherever, California. He wanted to show the extreme phenomena that signified something. And those albums are all legends, huge legends now. As a matter of fact, those albums are way more famous than anything Apple did. Do you remember anybody who was on Apple? No. But everybody knows, a good chunk of people into rock culture know about Wildman Fisher and Captain Beefheart and Alice Cooper and Permanent Damage, the GTOs. So he outdid the Beatles in terms of forming a label. And you can see a documentary on it. There's a documentary on the stages of the formation of the album and the different bands he recorded.
Yes, and I think one of the GTOs introduced Zappa to Alice Cooper.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Because they were just starting to play in L.A. And I think they came up to his home, and I think they had to do something in the driveway. Like they just improvised this. He said, perform, and I don't know what they did. Maybe they brought up their equipment, and it was like 6 a.m, I think. Of course, Zappa was still up, and they performed, and he said, yep, okay, you got a gig. We'll record your album. Now, well, here's what's interesting. In April 1975, let me see that the week that I performed at CBGB's, I was in New York. Various things, but Zappa was performing. This is when I went on stage and did air guitar. He was performing at the Nassau Coliseum. Well, after the concert, I'm sitting there backstage with Zappa and Beefheart and everybody. No, it was before the concert. And Frank had just come in. He came in late, but it was before the concert. All of a sudden, a commercial for Alice Cooper came on, and nobody had been paying attention to the TV in the back room at all. All of a sudden, there's Alice Cooper, and a couple of the mothers or people, staff, they go, Frank, look at that! And everybody shut up and watched Alice Cooper's ad for their monster act. You know, do you remember what he would do? It was kind of like a theater, and he'd, you know, act out ghoulish scenarios. And they all stopped and watched it. And then when it was finished, most of them said, what a bunch of shit. And they basically dismissed the poor ripoff of Frank. They considered it a ripoff of Frank's rock theater. So I saw him 7 years later, how he reacted to Alice Cooper after, you know, signing them at the beginning. And so in 1971, I forgot this one. In 1971, I went and saw Cooper at the town hall, some main place in New York City, and I went backstage, and I approached him. He's sitting there with a couple of groupies, and I said, what do you think the story on the back of John Wesley Harding? That's Dylan's album, came out in late 67, early 68, where Dylan talks about Frank. That's my theory. So I said, what do you think that the story at the back of John Wesley Harding, which says the key is Frank, refers to Frank Zappa? And he looked at me and he says, no, it refers to Frank, the guy, the creepy kid that lives down the street from your neighborhood. That was his answer, which I don't agree with. I don't think it refers to the creepy kid named Frank who lives down the street from me. But he was being, you know, smart ass, and then he wouldn't discuss it. This is back when I was a fucking huge hidden environment. Who knows why nobody would dare engage me? What did I fucking emanate? You know? Jeez. It was frightening.
You were looking for a role and an identity, saying you were a stupid thing of the Church of the Subgenius.
Yes. Yeah. Well, no, that was this is 1971. Church of Subgenius doesn't show up till 16 years later, in 1987. 16 years later. I had a role. My role was to monitor within my capacities in the Secret Council of 10. I had an identity. And I was probing, you know, youth culture. It was part of my assignment. So I got backstage with everybody, and it's miracles how I got backstage, because I had no visible means of support. Didn't look like I was even cool, but I was cute. Maybe that's how I got back. I was very nice looking, so they let me backstage. I was a nice male. Me and Robert Mapplethorpe were great male hustlers, male gigolos, male prostitutes. That's how I probably came across. And many people hit on me because they thought that's what I was. It's ridiculous. I used to walk down New York Street. Beg your pardon?
That's what you still are.
What did you say? I still am. I agree. I was walking down several times, just walking along 57th Street during the Newport, New York Jazz Festival in July '72. And while on, these two young men came up to me and says, "You want to fuck?" I said, "Well," and before it looked like I was starting to say yes, they go, "That'll cost you $100." I said, "Oh, you're charging me?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "No, okay, forget it." So they either thought I was a guy looking to fuck prostitutes, or they wanted to fuck me, but they didn't know whether it'd be worth it or not, so they made sure I paid for it. So it was quite confusing. But there was always people propositioning me. And I wasn't walking, I wore the boringest clothes. I was not fashionable looking. I just was incredibly good looking, good face. That's what fucking everybody wanted. I mean, I looked like Dylan and Jim Morris and all these guys, so... But I didn't have any style. I was wearing my father's fucking clothes. I'd wear his clothes, one shirt and jacket and pants for 5 fucking years. You know, if you knew me, hang around, Bob, don't you ever change your clothes? No, that's all I got. Just got this. Then they'd wear out, and then I'd grab another pair of his clothes. Never bought anything. Didn't know how to function in a store. Didn't know what to look for. Remember, I had to have a ring for my wedding on June 9th, 1970. Well, I didn't know how to do that. So Carolyn goes down to the local fucking Woolworths and buys a 10-cent ring, $10 ring. She bought it. Brought it to the courthouse. Okay, Bob, stick this on my finger when the time is right.
Oh, my God, that's great.
Because I was studying the effects. I was thinking about, what would God do with so much TV? What theological questions? Filioque heresy still relevant? I was thinking philosophical fucking shit, man. And art stuff. And about Frank's latest album. My thoughts were glorious. You actually could hear them. What I thought about all the best stuff going on. I used to call up Andy Warhol and say, when are you going to hire me? He says, you're just looking for a fucking role, Bob. We don't offer roles here.
What were your reports back to the Secret Council of 10 like? And did they understand what you were, how did you convey it to them?
This wasn't the Secret Council of 10 work. This is my own private, days off. What we did in the Secret Council 10 was go to serious military installations or labs and look at new technologies and figure out whether it was going to either make an opening for us or get rid of us. And also dealing with the crises. Remember, I told Dr. Beater about what was going to happen as a result of Watergate, and he wrote a book on it, Conspiracy Against the Dollar. We did a lot of different things. Also, it was a very dangerous time in the 70s. A lot of my friends got killed. I almost got killed a few times. Carolyn almost got killed. And you can listen to Mae Brussels' recordings and get her sheets for each recording, and she'll list you all the bodies that died that week. That would be the battles within what's called Big Brother. And my diaries, hint at it on a very superficial level. You're supposed to notice my interactions with J. Edgar Hoover. That's the important one. Starting in about 1954.
You and your people get the hell out.
Good, you're quoting it. That's right. He knew what we were.
Yeah.
I was just rehearsing. I mean, those diaries are conversations with people. All of that was just parallel world rehearsing for dealing with the ultimate pterodactyl when it showed up. And then start talking to it, conversing with it.
That's such a great word.
You have to realize the first few weeks. Right. The first few weeks, it was boring. I said, what is this? This is Abraham's derivative stuff. But the energy, probably the energy that no matter what I said, Iron had a comeback. That's probably what held me the first few weeks. Also, JW was getting off on it. He felt like a total orgasm. So, it was like giving JW a blowjob. A metaphysical blowjob every other day. He'd have his orgasm feeling.
Does he feel he's out of body? Does he lose time or not time? Does he know where he is during these sessions?
The first year or so, here's what JW experienced. In his mind, in his dream, or whatever altered state he was in, this is what he knew. He'd hear an order, like a topic would come up. He then would start looking through bankers' boxes for the answer. And as the sessions went on, 3-4 hours, the boxes would pile up. Every question was asked by me or anybody would evoke a box, and he'd look through and then sort of hold up the answer. And I don't think he read it out loud, but maybe in his mind he did. He never described what he did with the answer. And then another question would happen, and another banker's box would show up. So if we went 5 or 6 hours, his whole house was filled with banker's boxes, and he'd be sort of being crowded out to the patio. That's what he saw, the house filling up with banker's boxes as the session went on and on. And that's the way it was for a year or two. That was his experience. And then he would wake up, or we don't want to say wake up, we'd take him out of the altered state, and he'd have no clue what happened. And he didn't ever have a clue for the first year or so. It was only later when he would start to sort of remember it the next day. But Ion announced that on June 9th, when is this, 2009? Maybe June 9th, 2010. So just over a year, it was our anniversary, and Ion announced it's going to be different for JW. He's going to begin to remember what's going on as it happens. And that was a big moment. I could probably go find that fucking thing and play it for you when Ian says it to us. I know it was our anniversary, June 9th, 2010. So from that point on, for the next couple of years, JW would get the whole fucking thing downloaded within 24 hours. And then he would tell me where certain things happened on Tailgate. Go to the third hour, you'll hear Tina talking about McLuhan. He used to know where things happened. It was all in his head. The whole thing. He could sit back and listen to 6 hours if he didn't suppress it.
So, Bob, wasn't it always during sessions, at the end of it, JW would come on and talk about the pictures or the things that were mentioned in the session? Was it always like that?
Well, that's what happened with private. That would happen with private. I never asked them that in our sessions. But with private sessions that people paid for, Ian told me that JW requires a role, an identity. He doesn't want to just be someone who goes out and then comes back and doesn't know what's happened. So Ian said, ask him what images he saw so that he'll have a bit of a participation. So I don't know what he personally thought. Did he look forward to coming out of the trance or state and then look forward to telling people images? But he did it seriously for several years of private sessions. And Ian told us that was a requirement for JW's personality. He couldn't. It would be meaningless for him unless he had some input. So we'd listen to him do these ridiculous pictures, and usually they'd be relevant, but it was always odd. Like they would never always fit the person, so we'd have to see if they could take it or not, or whether JW seemed like a phony or making it up. It was always a bit of a strain to do it. But I was a good soldier, and I put up with it.
No, I really like it.
You have to give me... What did you just say? You really like this?
Yeah.
What are you liking?
No, I really liked at the end of the session that I had.
Oh, the pictures. You liked it
for JW. Yeah, because obviously that was probably going on for him all the time, and he didn't know what to do with it.
I don't know about that. It would go on after he would get pictures after a session. I don't know if 5 hours later he's doing something else. I don't know if he got pictures, but later, when he would download everything happened, he definitely could feel ionauts and have say things. That's partly the gossip. Sometimes it's JW talking about people because he would pick up on them. I mean, he would really know what was going on with people. He was so open, he could feel what they were going through. He did it to me all the time. He always knew when I sprained an ankle or this happened or that happened. He always would ask me, he says, Bob, get rid of that sore foot. It really hurts me. He would feel hurt by my hurt toe. It would hurt him. And then he would get Ion to fix it. After a while, I couldn't fix it or I'd just put up with it. He would all of a sudden be gone the next day, and he would get Ion to fix it. I've had many, many healings from what?
Oh, I was just going to say, I remember my session that he always drank coffee and didn't like coffee, but just drank it, because of his sensitivity.
Well, it got changed, Eben. It got changed to jasmine tea. That's what he drank. The coffee was for a while. But remember, the second day of the first starting, he stopped smoking and stopped coffee. So I don't think you would even know that he drank coffee. He didn't drink coffee. He had to drink something because he'd go for 5-7 hours, so he had to be lubricated. So somebody, I think the Chinese elders recommended jasmine tea. Now look at that. The fucking elders in China are so aware of what we're doing. They're pretty enlightened. We didn't know jasmine tea. They sent a box of jasmine tea to JW, and I think he didn't like it at first, but he took it as something to drink, and then after a while he really started to crave it. There's a nice story for you. The fucking mountain solved that problem. It's called the elders are called the mountain. And they're the guys. Do you know this whole Donald Trump fucking thing? It's all run by the Chinese. They're doing this Zen game on the American population.
Well, Ion tonight said President Trump, and then started laughing.
Yeah.
That scared me. I was like, President Trump.
It's worse than that's nothing. What do you mean, Eben? You're so identifying with the White House that you're worried about who's president? That's stupid, Eben.
Well,
I ban you from Dialogue with Ian for the next 6 months. You're ostracized. Go enjoy your private attention.
Don't stop.
Come on. Trump's going to be president. It's going to be fucking awesome, man. He's probably going to cause World War X. What? It's not for you. It's for who is it for? The Black Caucus? Are you speaking for the Black Caucus?
No. It's for our little folks that just don't get it.
I mean, what personally amazes JW is that Bernie Sanders, a guy who says he's a practicing communist, is sort of winning. That is the ultimate absurdity, because JW's parents are good friends of the Goldwaters. They knew Barry Goldwater and LBJ's Lady LBJ, Lady Bird, and they know what Barry Goldwater represented, the meme he represented, and JW said the other day, I think we recorded, or maybe it was Ion, that if Barry Goldwater's alive, they would have assassinated Barry. Saying you can't go around saying you're practically communist and running for president and maybe get there. That's outrageous. That's anti-American. But there ain't no America anymore, so you can do it. You can have a president who wasn't even born here, born in Indonesia, Mr. Obama, not even American, whatever, by birth. Yet he became president. This shows you what a garbage dump that is. It's very important in the Android meme, but there's no controlling about who gets to occupy it. Well, maybe I should say it this way. No democratic input into who gets to occupy it. I mean, all the voting booths, I assume, are rigged.
Didn't you say that Dr. Beter figured that out?
That happened to Dr. Beter in 1967 when he ran for governor of West Virginia.
Yeah.
A guy called him up and said, if you want any votes, your votes to register, you got to give me $250,000. And Beter told him to go fuck himself, left the Democratic Party, ran as independent, and lost. But every precinct that didn't have a computer, he did well. But the majority were computerized, and he didn't get any votes there. So he went to the Congo, and helped them develop gold resources. And then 5 years later, I showed up 4 years later, we showed up and told them, this Watergate's going to lead into a pretty crazy situation. You better get back there and write this book, The Conspiracy Against the Dollar. And he did it and came out in 1973. Then he went public in 1974 and started doing his audio letters with his information coming from the Rockefeller children. The sons and daughters of Nelson were his major sources. They were going against their parents.
Wow.
And then the Rockefeller Nelson secretary was thrown out a window. He was murdered because of her helping Beater. So Beater managed to do that for 7 years. He got 82 sessions done. He got 80 sessions and he ended in late 82. And then he went and worked for the Queen. And then that brought me in. And we did the gold deal in late 86, early 87. And then he was murdered, killed, whatever, on March 13th, 1987. And I wasn't.
By who?
I remained standing. I don't know. I don't see him as murdered. I don't know if I pursued that. There were so many people dying in the 70s and 80s around me that, and I never went to any funeral, but so many people dying, I gave up trying to figure out what was doing it. I just was amazed I was still alive.
But I had the impression with all these genealogies and all these timelines or things, like all this fallen state is like a Fata Morgana. We think this happened in the Renaissance and this happened now and this going to be, and it's all pornography. It's all fake. I
agree. It's all a simulation. It's like the Akashic Records. Ian always put down the Akashic Records, which contain everything that ever was and going to be. He says that's not it. See, so we gradually expand through interaction with Ion our imagery of what is the world that your being is in, the image that you think you have. That's not the case. You can't image what's happening. The most bizarre imagery you could come up with is the best, is the closest. How you would image the Renaissance, bumping up with Donald Trump and the Egyptian pyramids, or China, or the Buddhians, or the Guff. You have to put all these things are in the same spot, a dimensionless spot. So you look at it from an angle. That's the importance of the dodecahedron or the angular discipline. Each one of us is an angle, and the idea is to get beyond your conditioned angle of perspective.
And once you get outside that perspective, are you able to see all the dimensions at once?
No, because there's more than all dimensions. That's a limited description of what is.
What happens when you get outside your own angle?
You gain weight, start getting stupid, you lose friends, and have no role, lose your identity.
Oh, that's already happened for me.
Yeah.
I don't know if I had my angle.
Yeah, that's what happens to everybody. Everybody gets nailed. Contrast increases, and this is before the drops. Now you can go through all the disservices, and feel great. That's the revolution. Ion is allowing us to go through our breakdown in comfort now with our products. So it's a kind of a gulf. It's almost like our products are the guff. If the guff started empty when Ion started to speak in March 2009, the guff had come forth and started to create and say things, then it affected everything and even made a substance that you could handle the Armageddon if you consumed it. So that's part of what Ein says. The guff empties and everybody gets swept back here in an ascended state by default. So we are eating the food of the gods, the food of the heaven. And it's so subtle, you can miss that it's having effects on you. And yet for other people, it's just blatant obvious. Carolyn was showing me today, this woman broke her ankle, and they did the surgery on it, and she had a terrible rash for 10 years, right where the surgery was. And she sent pictures, Carolyn showed to me, a very ugly rash on her ankle for 10 years. She grabbed she just got some Renew the other day, put the Renew on the rash, and it went away like in 24 hours after being there for 10 years.
Wow.
And she said, like Carolyn doesn't know her, and she wrote and she said, this, that happened, and she says, I just want to meet you so I can hug you. That's how she ended her email.
Absolutely. I was
and
eating
it's really
that.
Interesting.
I was like putting it on
Make your voice louder. You were doing what with it?
I was eating it. I was putting it on a sore tooth. It tasted so good, the drops and the rose.
Wow. You're not talking about Renew. You're talking about the drop. You're talking about eating Renew, right?
Yes.
Carolyn asked her, I think, I said, gee, I'd like to put them on Dobbs, the pictures, and she said, yeah, I'm going to ask her, or did ask her. Oh, yeah, she asked and hadn't heard back, but we might post those pictures. They're pretty disgusting looking. That the poor lady had to put up with for 10 years. So we discussed new things with Ion. We discussed the ramifications of what's going to happen with the amino acids. It's pretty incredible. Basically, Carolyn evokes this kind of content because she's asking about this and that scientific invention or what we're going to do, and it's absolutely phenomenal what Ion does with it. I mean, see, that's why I'm so confident. I've experienced enough of Ion to know this is fucking amazing. Other people, they don't have that exposure. They don't have that confidence.
So is it that because everything is simultaneous, you're looking at technologies, etc., how do we know, is it that you're creating and shaping the environment that is Dobbstown? How do we know what the next now is going to present?
Ion. I will tell
and
us.
What does that reflect?
That's Ion's point. I don't know, but yeah, you go with Ion. And Ion might tell you, might not tell you, depending. If Ion says he can't answer that, I respect that. I don't get mad that he won't answer it. I said, yeah, Ion probably knows why it can't be said right now. And, our Coldplay situation is absolutely amazing. Our living water situation is amazing. So, it's pretty neat being in the front row seat. And that's what said in 1976. I think it was Paul Shockley, I think, channeled it. And they said, if you listen to Cosmic Awareness, you'll have a front row seat. Well, I subscribed to the newsletter, got it for years, and ended up in the front row seat. Not with them, but with something else. No, I'm not in the front row seat. I'm the fucking MC up on the stage, right? I'm the guy. I'm there selling the front row seats. Who wants a front row seat? You're going to give me $2,000. You want a front row seat? Oh, by the way, come on Saturday. You have a front row seat. That escapes. I don't know how. I can't control it. If I had my way, there'd be no radio show. Everybody have to be charged. They have to have a front row seat. But unfortunately, I can't control everything. So you guys get a front row seat every Saturday. We recommend you use it. Anyways,
Okay.
Can we get back on to Zappa? Let's do.
Sure.
Let's. Now, Roxy, do you have more you want to do on the GTOs or that theme?
Well, I was thinking how this situation of women goes back to the fall that women were blamed with the loss of paradise because Adam ate the dust because Adam gave him the apple or whatever. And that was the reason why for so many centuries women were not listened, were ignored, were not able to express. I mean, there were exceptions like Margarita de Navarra, but in general, what they had to say was not important. And I'm impressed that this phenomenon is actually so recent that women start having some type of freedom, and they are criticized and judged. You know, most see groupies, for example, as sluts, but I think they were only young women turned on by the electric environment and trying to explore different aspects of taking their power back. But it was a mistake.
Here's a good, interesting statement, Roxy. McLuhan said that if a family has a car, it cannot be a family. It goes way back there, for as far as he's concerned. It goes back to the 1920s. Once you have a car in the family domestic environment, you don't have a family anymore. So, yeah, go back to what you were saying.
Yes, and then the TV is like the altar of the house. In the Roman houses, there was always an altar in the house, and this is like the TV, the place of worship.
Right. It's a pagan.
And I think.
And what's it provide?
Yes, it's somehow interesting to see how this being turned on by the electric environment somehow made stronger this power outside yourself. And these girls were adoring these rock stars as gods. And that's a type of latria. It's the worshipping of idols.
Yeah.
So they thought that was a way of being feminist or liberated, but actually it's not like that. And it won't be...
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yes, there is no liberation until both sexes sort of come in balance. We also accept that we have both sexes in us, and we stop like having this battle.
Can I ask a question?
Right. Who's that?
Oh, you heard me. Okay. Debbie?
Deb, you're not allowed in here, but what's your question?
Why am I not allowed?
Oh, because this is a special Zappa thing we do with Bert and Roxy and me.
Okay. Whatever. What, Why did McLuhan say that if a family has a car, you can't have a family?
Because the kid could get in the car, which he called it a house on wheels, and drive off and not be controlled by the environment of the parents.
Uh-huh.
You know, parents controlled everybody before that. And what you did, where you went. You get a car, you can steal it and drive off and go 3,000 miles and never see your family again. Or just the lifestyle of using the car on the weekend for dating. You know, you're a teenager or something. There had never been a way for the chemical body to get away from the parental power or authority. Mm-hmm. When you get a car, man, you can drive 100 miles and then be back later in the afternoon, and nobody knows where you went. That's like you begin to have experience that the parents can't control. They can't. They don't know what you're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're sensitive to the dynamics in family life, you can understand why something like that would upset.
And then the kid could also go get involved in drugs, stuff like that.
Yeah, rob banks.
Uh-huh. So this really wasn't a control...
Like they did in the 30s.
Oh, really? So this wasn't a factor...
Okay, that's enough, Deb. That's enough of your questions. You just go on and on and on. Okay, so I don't know where you are, which voice you're coming through, but we got to figure out what to do next. We're not doing the... list of freakout names. So I could find an interview, and we could talk about that. But you got anything to say, Bert or Eben, about Zappa in particular?
Not at this time, at the moment.
Okay. I'm going to read a little bit of this Barry Miles interview. And let's see, I think everybody is available. So Miles says to him, do you listen to much modern classical? Zappa says, and this is in August 1969. I listen to it most of the time. I hardly ever listen to rock and roll. Statistically, I listen to more Stravinsky than anything else, but I don't listen to that many records because when I'm on there, most of what I hear coming out of the speakers is the tape that I'm working on at that time. So the majority of his time, he's listening to his own stuff. If I ever take a break, I have a certain bunch of records I listen to over and over again. I don't listen to much new stuff. Now, when he shows Ringo in 200 Motels, turning as Ringo as Zappa, turning on the radio and listening to the live radio environment, and Zappa once said, radio is new life. He's listening to actually new stuff. So I don't know if this is a completely accurate response by him, or he can't be bothered to go into the details. So then Miles says, when you use 50s rock, what are you trying to do with it? Zappa says, you have a reference to the guitar solo in that one article you wrote. He's referring to something that Miles wrote, which says, quote, Dwayne Eddy influence and not a trace of blues. So that's some quote that Miles made about something Frank did. Zappa says, I take blues-oriented material, and in that classification, I also include the ooh-wah, doo-wah triplet-style stuff, and make certain intellectual uses of it, which makes it sound non-bluesy and non-rock and roll. For instance, I take the idea of the blues, first of all, as a particular kind of scale which functions against a certain kind of a chord, giving a certain kind of emotional thing as a byproduct of that acoustical phenomenon happening. That is to say, a chord with a major third in it that's got flat thirds, sevenths, and flat fives bent up against a regular major totality, and that makes the blues effect happen. Of course, to this phenomenon today, we have the fuzz tone in the wah-wah pedal, which tends to make just about anything played on it sound bluesy. Hawaiian music played on the fuzz tone guitar won't sound like Hawaiian music, and neither would your favorite foxtrot. It's just that it has a certain emotional thing attached to it. Anyway, I take the elements that this music is made out of, and I look at it and I say, quote, well, now triplets. Now let's think. Basically, a triplet is 3 notes in the space of 2 or in the space of 4, depending on how you're using it. Or if you're Stockhausen, in the space of, I'm going to find out where this continues, in the space of British audience, so is it? Yeah, okay, so I think this is where it goes. So he's saying, I say, quote, well, now triplets. Now let's think. Basically, a triplet is 3 notes in the space of 2 or in the space of 4, depending on how you're using it. Or if you're Stockhausen, in the space of 7 or 5, it's 3 with a colon, and then the number of other notes is supposed to replace. So that's all that he thinks to himself. So then he goes, so I look at it and I say, quote, well, in the olden days, they used to go ding, ding, ding like that, and it made you want to take this girl and squeeze her tits and dance real slow. But suppose that, see, there's talking about the environment controlling the chemical body. But suppose that the chord the guy is playing with his right hand on the piano isn't C, E, G, and it doesn't chance to be an A minor after 2 beats. Suppose it's some weird cluster and something else happens afterwards. It's still based on rock and roll triplets, but if you do, then he says, end of quote, and he goes, it's a question of what happened if you use that material, that basic structure, and inject something else into it, how much of the original emotional twang of the triplet piano figure is still left? I write music because I want to find out what it sounds like. Sometimes when I write it down on paper, I haven't the faintest idea what it's going to be like when it's played. I just don't know. I don't want to know till I hear it. I don't want to know till I hear it because I want to get it down there as fast as I can before I forget what I'm doing. So I'm just as surprised as anybody else when it's done sometimes. There are other times when I know exactly what these 2 notes together are going to sound like. The best example, now they've got to find where this is. The best example, my most recent cliche, stolen from somebody else, is a combination of flute and flugelhorn, or flute and clarinet playing a half step apart with trumpet voiced on top. Say, for instance, a B and a C, those 2 notes, which would ordinarily sound like a discord on the piano, if you play them like that in the right setting, will give you a definite impression of an A minor 9th chord. So some things you just know. If you write those dots and write the correct instructions over the dots, that a certain sound event is going to happen. But other things, that a certain sound event is going to happen. But, see, it's like journalism. But other things you just don't know, and the only way to find out is to write it. Get somebody to play it, listen to it, and see whether you like it. If you like it, you use it in the album. If you don't like it, you throw it away, and don't tell anyone that you tried it, or they'll think you're crazy. Barry Miles says, what's your motivation to use early 50s stuff? I think, Zappa says, I think it's very powerful music. It's not dynamite built into it. It's glandular dynamite. How much of it, says Barry, how much of it is trying to bring out anything about your own upbringing in the West Coast? Zappa says, not a hell of a lot. So it's not about him. He learned that much from me. Let's see if we can find where it continues. Still looking. These are awkwardly Xeroxed. Still looking.
Is he playing a game by saying it doesn't have anything to do with him?
No, that's me. Yes, he is working with matter like a scientist. The music, the chords, the notes, and that are the kind of chemistry he's working with. He's not doing it to make you feel good and have a emotional teen experience. He's working with matter. He's trying to do like Gurdjieff, create octaves to do something to people. Or not do something, just do something among the instruments.
It's just that being an artist is such an intimate affair because it is you and your creation. And so for him to say, coming from wherever he was, going to the 50s music, but saying that it isn't about him, it sounds like he's trying to be opaque in some way, not taking full responsibility.
Yeah. I know he is opaque. I don't know what he was talking about there. Did you understand any of that, Roxy, when he was discussing his method? Oh, she got knocked out, I think. Did you, Roxy, understand of what I read?
I was reading something, but I was not paying attention. But I think he was just explaining how the different type of figures of rhythm and of the notes. I heard something about triplets.
Yeah.
In this 50s music, it's less aggressive than the rock or the pop of the 60s and the 70s. He says it's more, I don't want to say romantic, but
it's sweeter.
Like he said, it makes you want to hold somebody.
Right. Hey, listen, let me continue. I found the connection. So.
Well, but it's interesting how
go ahead.
he's aware of this type of body reactions to music, like a bass or a rhythm, without really noticing. You just start doing these movements automatically, or without any awareness. You just do it. It's like automatic, autonomic. So that's interesting.
What is he doing?
Analyzing how people react to different types of rhythms and sounds and music.
Right. He's like a guy that. You speak louder, Eben.
I was just thinking how when he says, when Roxy was just saying that some music makes you want to hold someone, how in the early, days of music in the United States, you had swing and all of that where everything was dependent on a partner, and that music, was there. And then now people dance by themselves, for hours. So it's so interesting how the music brings out a different type of dance.
Yeah. And then you can look at the social dynamics that make people perceive, an environment drenched on cell phones is way different from a people drenched in radio in the 30s, or drenched in black and white TV in the 50s, or drenched in, say, satellite TV, cable TV in the 80s. They evoke a different kind of music and a different kind of dancing.
Yes, and I think the most maniac system is the classical Indian music system. They have a scale for everything, for every hour of the day, for every emotion, because they think that a specific scale, for example, may make you feel devotion or love or happiness, and they really made a catalog of all these scales and the thing that will correspond in human emotion and to what time, to what season, and amazing how frequencies affect men.
Okay, so, right, thank you for that. I don't have anything to say to that. Anybody have a response for that?
Other than it's amazing. So they have a scale. Is it a scale for every hour on 24 hours, Roxana, or every day?
Yes.
In their so it's every day or every hour?
Every hour, but they might have also for days, for months, or because they have for everything, for every emotion. And yeah, sometimes they do concerts that go on for 3 days, to be able to play all the scales of different hours.
Is it three consecutive
when
days?
you have a literary society, let me say it. When you have a literary society, you're in a box, and you fill up the environment. Acoustic societies, pre-literary societies, program the environment. See, they're consciously aware of themselves as environmentally programmed, and so the music does it every hour. They in a way, accept their robotic response, or their autonomic response. Difference. They program, non-literary societies program their situations, whereas literary societies fill up the box. They just fill up the empty space that's been made by literacy. Fill up with new breakthroughs. They don't try to put it in order.
Yes, but I think it's somehow true that also the Greeks had this similar system of classification of scales and different emotions, of the modes. So I suppose Frank was exploring that, how different types of music will create different types of emotion in the audience, in himself.
Right. Okay, so let me read you this part. Barry Miles says, how much of it is trying to bring out anything about your own upbringing in the West Coast? He says, not a hell of a lot. Then Miles says, when you attack that aspect of America, are you using 50s rock in any way as a symbol? Zappa says, one of the reasons why the images in a lot of the songs are so West Coast orientated is that I write songs sometimes to entertain the other members of the band and about 3 or 4 friends that I have in the world who know, he writes for the other members of the band and about 3 or 4 friends that I have in the world who know about the really obtuse, arcane references in those songs. Captain Beefheart is one of the guys who knows what all the songs are about. And he's just seen a few weird things happen. I get kind of a laugh out of the fact that other people are going to try and interpret that stuff and come up with some really grotesque interpretations of it. It gives me a certain amount of satisfaction. You can imagine how insane that must get on a song such as Electric Aunt Jemima, which was written about an amplifier. Yes, it's a Stendhal amplifier, about this big, that I used on a couple of sessions. But there are some other references in the song to a meeting held in the Denny's coffee shop in Lancaster, California, about 6 or 7 years ago. So that'd be about 1962. At about 4 o'clock in the morning, Don Vliet, that's Captain Beefheart, who's otherwise known to the world as Captain Beefheart, and I were sitting in this coffee shop discussing what we were going to do to the music business. And it's the line about Monza, capital M-O-N-Z-A, unquote. It's the line about Monza because we were discussing the problems of lyrics in the music we were being fed on the radio. I always felt that the music I grew up with, except for the rhythm blues, was just horrible, and I didn't want to be subjected to it, and I wished that I'd had something better to choose from. But I couldn't get anything better, so we were talking about this. And now I got to find where it continues. And so he says, and I wish that I'd had something better to choose from, but I couldn't get anything better, so we were talking about this, and I said, quote, well, I'm going to do this. And Don says, well, I'm going to do that. I said, okay, well, let's go do that. So that's how they launched their conspiracy. And you can hear Electric Aunt Jemima on Uncle Meat. You want me to play that? That's the launching, sort of. No, well, not exactly. It's about an amplifier, but it's in the same interview. Like they're both scheming. What?
I'd like to hear it.
Hey, look at this. Okay, we'll get to that. I just want to read this. It says, the next question, what's your music going to be like in, say, 5 years' time? Do you ever consider this? Zappa says, well, I can't worry too much about that. Something will happen, probably get more obscure. No, that can't really say. Well, the invisible technical stuff he did, maybe that's obscure. So then the guy Barry says, you haven't any long-term aims or projects? Zappa says, I'm interested in getting into films, and I'm also interested in being able to write more and more. I'm also interested in being able to write more and more complex music for larger ensembles and actually getting it played as soon as possible. That's the main problem of being a composer. It's a lonely, dismal job. See, that's visual space. It's a lonely, dismal job because while you're sitting down and making the dots, and you got to find where it continues, and you there it is. So that's the main problem of being a composer. It's a lonely, dismal job because while you're sitting down and making the dots and you think you know what some of it sounds like, you never can be sure until you hear it realized as a vibration hanging in the air. And the grisly means you have to go through to make that happen are so complicated and almost impossible under certain conditions, especially if you're writing for an orchestra. Man, the chances of me getting stuff played by an orchestra now are fair. You know, not excellent, but fair. The chances improve if I rent the orchestra myself. But when I first started writing, I had no chance whatsoever of hearing any of the things I'd written. Material on the Mother's Invention albums for the past 5 years. A lot of it was written before there was even the Mothers. Because I'm still digging out of these trunks. Because I'm still digging it out of these trunks and saying, quote, I wonder what this sucker sounds like, unquote. Miles says, this is why I wondered why you weren't interested in getting involved with the modern classical scene, being published by one of the houses. Zappa says, well, but what does a modern classical publisher do? He's not going to get you any performances. The performance of works is chosen by little old ladies and people on the board of directors of symphony orchestras and all their faggot friends and all the rest of that stuff. In that world, they rely very heavily on who you study with, where you were trained, and what school are you into. Are you a serialist? Are you a serialist? Or are you aleatory? Or what the fuck are you? They want you in the union, and they want to stick a tuxedo on you, and they might put you into a concert hall every once in a while. But mainly, why don't you just sit there and listen to Beethoven, because you know that's got to be the best thing that could ever happen to you. Zappa says, I can't stand that shit. That's the most sick end of the business. Serious music is hurting. Miles says, do you see yourself as educating your audience as you go along? Frank says, let me tell you, there's something that we're going to try to do to correct the missing link between pop music and the so-called serious world, and also the record industry executives who need to find out what it is they're selling because they don't know how important pop music is today. Look at that, guys. They don't know how important pop music is today. As therapy, as acoustic space release in the global membrane of tactility. See, there's McLuhan. They don't know how important, people think, well, Frank doesn't like pop. Look, how important pop music is today. All they know is that that's what's making money this month. They don't really know what a revolution it is in terms of musical history, because there are a lot of people working in pop today who are doing things that are artistic and actually mean them that way. There are also people who pretend to be artistic who are doing just complete bullshit. But this is today's serious music. So he's saying the pop music is the serious music. I think it's living serious music. So-called serious composers are kind of living in a vacuum because who is their audience? 40-year-old faggots that go to a concert because that's the place to go, not because they like the music? 40-year-old faggots that go to a concert because that's the place to go, not because that's the place to go, not because they like the music. Miles says, how concerned are you with putting over a really precise musical image? Does it finish up as accurate as you'd like it? Zappa says, not very often. No, I don't think any composer gets a consistent version of what he imagines because it's so hard. Now, a painter, he's got it easy. He just takes the paint and goes blat, and he did it. If you write music, it goes to a copyist, and you hope he doesn't make any mistakes when he copies the parts. Then it goes to a conductor who conducts it for you. Let's see, who conducts it for you. And then it goes to a conductor who conducts it for you. Just a second. Then you've got these musicians, and every one of them has got a family problem or an ego problem, or they're just bored, or there's some fucking thing. And especially with an orchestra, I'm sure they'd never get it right. You can't, man. There's just too many problems. That's one of the reasons why I devote so much time to developing specialized skills with the mother's invention, because I know that there are things. He actually just says mothers. That's one of the reasons why I devote so much time to developing specialized skills with the mothers, because I know that there are things that we can do that an orchestra would never be able to do. Not the way they're run now, and not with the attitude of the players that are in them. So this gives me a lot of latitude in what I can write, because the things that I imagine, the sounds that I want to hear, a mere orchestra could not produce them. End of interview, but there's many other parts we didn't read, but that's pretty good, eh? Pretty good statement.
Yes.
Who can speak? Who's blocked off? Everybody's blocked off. I'm demuted you. Go ahead, Roxy.
Yes, I really like it. It's like very precise. He's saying many things we have said. It's a confirmation of what we were talking about.
Yeah, now this, and see, Miles did great in-depth interviews. Luckily, I was tracking it all, so I read these interviews. This came out in this August 29th, September 11th, there it is, 911. August 29th, September 11th, 69 issue of International Times out of London. But you read this, you say, oh, the fuck, this guy, he's doing it, he's trying to be a serious composer. And you have to realize that nobody was interested in him who should have been interested. They didn't know this stuff for 30 years later. Talk about being an invisible environment.
But he's right about...
So I would track...
what we call serious music, ernste Musik. Yeah, many composers are more in an ego trip or in an intellectual labyrinth, in concepts, and more than really the music.
Right. And he's complaining about the orchestras. When he finally got people doing stuff in the late 70s and early 80s, he said this. So in a way, he actualized it. He had a lot of kinds of problems with the musicians. He was not impressed with the classical orchestra people. And but he said all this 15 years before, so he created the problem. But aside from that, he's right. Why not run his own band and know that that's serious music, that pop music is serious. It's a serious environment. You couldn't get more fucking McLuhan-esque than this. I mean, even to say that the serious orchestras in Carnegie Hall are putrid nothings compared to pop music. Now, McLuhan said a similar statement. I think it was in the book he did with Carpenter, They Became What They Beheld, where they talked about the recorded music, the pop music today is 100 times better than anything you ever heard before. You know, going back to jazz or classical or historical. Now, there's not, and these are old guys. What parent who grew up with McLuhan and Cage and Carpenter say that? Nobody would say that. They would not agree that their kids' Beatles shit is more important than their love of some big band or some Beethoven. I mean, it's outrageous what he's saying. 50 years ago. But if you knew McLuhan stuff, you'd understand Figure Ground. You knew Bob's world, you would say, yep, this guy. When Zappa looked at Joyce, he said, yep, that guy's real. Well, when I would read Zappa interviews, I go, yep, that guy's real. I mean, why am I considered the greatest DJ ever? All I have to do is play fucking great pop music. Better than any experience you can get anywhere. Unless you go to the Kit Kat Club, and I don't know if I could top the Kit Kat Club. That's pretty unique experience.
They're better now. A friend of mine was telling me what they do.
What do they do now? They do something different?
They sell themselves. Like you can go and say, I sell myself for an hour, for the whole night, and you say what you want, like.
Oh, that you mean that
to be kissed, caressed, or
those
anything.
porn movies? Yeah, those porn movies that you were telling us about. Well, what do? You sell yourself? You mean you can be a prostitute or a hustler right there? Is that what you're saying? In the club?
Yeah, and it's like you get paid to live your fantasies. I want this and
you
this
pay.
and this.
Well, that's like
for an hour, for the whole night, and some people pay to do it.
So it's turned into a brothel. It's a brothel. You pay and you get what you wanted.
Yeah.
And
yes.
But with that other place where you'd go be in a film or something, how is that different?
Because I think they have like orgies and they make films, but they have like fantasy costumes or like theme parties.
Oh yeah.
And they pay to get in.
A little more props.
To be filmed.
Yeah. I like to see those films, see what these amateurs look like. Probably looks pretty putrid. Or not. Maybe they make it good. We need stimulation, guys. We are always being boarded out, being made bored. Endless productivity. Pop music is medicine, Frank's saying. You need it. People need it to release themselves from the tactile. The tactility is a real extension, and the ears is an old environment. So it has to be heavily massaged, keep you distracted from the pain of the tactile extension. And then when you realize how vast that is, and then you come in, and then you realize that ion outdoes that, it shows you how vast ion is. Let's see what's going on. I never get a chance to look at the chat line. Gene says, "You go, Bob," but I don't know when that was written. They're talking about Julian Assange obsolescing the United Nations. Gene laughs. Bob asked Andy Warhol for a role. No, didn't I say Andy Warhol asked me for a role? What the hell? Did I do that? Anybody remember?
Yeah, you said you called him up.
I used to call him up. Yeah. I used to, what? What did she say? What'd she say? Bert.
Said that you called him up, but I remember it was a...
Yeah, I did call him up. I called him up several times. I don't know how I presented myself. Should I say? You got Joe D'Alessandro. He was their main gay or male hustler in the late 60s, early 70s in those later movies. Joe D'Alessandro. And I said, I'm way fucking cuter than Joe, Mr. Warhol. Why don't you have me? And he would just go, well, just come on over, Bob. You know, he'd have this very passive, accepting, just come over. Sure, we'll do that, Bob. You go over there, and there's fucking security. You can't get in there because he had been shot the year before. In June 68, he was shot the same night as Robert Kennedy. And he became very paranoid after that. And he would still be his, weak or whatever he is, his passive self. He was like a eunuch, what do you want? What are you going to do with me next? Okay, do this to me. Do that to me. So I say, like, can I come over and be your next star? Sure, Bob, come on over. Yeah, yes, we'd like to have you. And then you can't even get in the building. There's so much security. So you'd have to go wait till the parties and get in through friends. Eventually I could get in, and get in that way, and then you'd go over and talk to Andy, and he'd still be the passive, no mind, the guy. You go, yes, I like Frank Zappa, Bob. Yes, I really like. He never heard one fucking album. He just agreed with everybody. And then he'd say, I'm just a machine. It was the most vacuous, absurd put-on performance scene going.
Well, he did pop art.
He didn't do anything. He took his immediate. McLuhan's definition is greater than any art that he did. McLuhan's definition of what he did, he just took, since all environments were obsolete inside the tactile global membrane, any environment then becomes art form. So he would just sit there and film his environment. And to the average 19th century throwback consumer, this was revolutionary. But what was more revolutionary is that McLuhan could explain it and put it in a context. That's more exciting. Couldn't get Andy to fucking think about this stuff or admit he was. He did write a book or two. Now, Ted Carpenter became a good friend of his, and he said Andy's a lot smarter, Bob, than you give him. Well, I know he was smart, but he, when McLuhan met him in 1973 at Ted Carpenter's, he saw Andy Warhol, and he goes, "What's that rube doing here?" He called Warhol a rube, R-U-B-E, which means, a country bumpkin. He yelled it out. And then Kurt Vonnegut, who J.W. likes, Kurt Vonnegut, the famous writer, he was there at the party. And he says to Ted, and Ted reported this. This totally embarrassed Ted. He was the host for this. And he says, "Who's that guy over there?" "Well, that's Kurt Vonnegut." "Oh, I can't stand his writing." And Ted said he yelled this out. So he said it was a very awkward night with McLuhan sitting with his enemies, Warhol and Kurt Vonnegut. And Ted was in no mood, and he didn't like it. He got mad at Marshall. We liked it. We Canadians, we like any attack on the fucking dumb Americans. Now I'm going to become an American. Imagine that. That's how fucked up the world is. I got to become an American to fix this shit. If you told me 4 years ago I'd become an American, that would have been outrageous.
Where would you rather be?
Oh, I like being a Canadian. I've got a French passport. I'm French and Canadian, so I got two countries. Actually, I don't like being a Canadian anymore. I've been here. I like being a Hawaiian. I'm a fucking Hawaiian, and I'm all for states' rights, and let's fucking separate from the Union. Let's have Maui separate from Oahu and Kauai and the Big Island. We'll have from our own country here, which is actually going to happen, people. There's an exclusive for you there. Maui is going to become a country, and I'm going to be president of it for life.
I never know.
It's going to be a wonderful environment. So,
Bob, in that article you just read, did I hear?
Part? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about what I heard earlier, which you read. No, I heard something earlier you read that the Mothers' music was written before the Mothers. So he composed all of their music before he actually formed the band? Is that what? Wow.
Yep, that's what he's saying. He started composing when he was 14 or 15, and writing serious music, and, for orchestras. And it took, he started in 55. It took him 10 years to get it played. and he had to form a pop band to do it. I mean, that's like Beethoven infiltrating Beatles land. I mean, he's a composer, and he said a lot of the music in the first album was written long before the Mothers were formed in his classical music style, or however you call that, writing it down on bars and staffs with notes. And, you have to realize back then, nobody knew this about him. He was just like an advertising man trying to rip off the youth market.
That's fascinating. I mean, because just to hear you read something that he didn't know how it sounded until it sounded. But my question is, what inspired him to create it that he knew he was writing something? That's fascinating. That's genius on the edge that he
it's much
inspired him to write the music.
What he was doing, he's like Joyce would grab stuff out of the Encyclopedia Britannica and just listen to this, Bert. James Joyce would grab stuff out of the Encyclopedia Britannica, out of newspapers, and ram it into the pages, into this book. He didn't know what it was what the effect was, and then it's a collage. And Zappa's doing the same thing. He's composing ahead of his hearing. He's just grabbing any absurd thing and juxtaposing it with something else.
Yeah.
It's like Jackson Pollock, dripping paint. Yeah, he's possessed.
Yeah.
So let's see. This is a long interview. There's probably other neat things in here. Look at this, Miles. I think the mixing and juxtaposition of different time levels seems very important to you. Zappa says, I think of the art of composition as time painting, You're being employed by your audience to decorate a piece of time for them. In the same way a painter uses a piece of canvas and he's got to slap it on that, I have the opportunity of taking a piece of time and sticking little things on it. In a live performance, I get to do it with visual and audio material. On a record, I can do it with pieces of time from all over. In some albums, I've condensed as much as 10 years into one little piece of plastic. And then Miles says, this is presumably why you don't use electronically generated sound, because it has no time reference. Zappa says, one of the reasons that I don't use electronically generated material is that I can't afford the equipment to do it. The other reason is that after you have enough money to buy a synthesizer and get all the rest of the gizmos that goes with it, I think that before you make some kind of statement with an instrument of that complexity, you better get your shit together before you do it. I wouldn't want to just get a hold of a synthesizer and immediately make it. I want to find my own way in that. At the moment, Barry says, at the moment, every note you play has a time reference, like a year. One line will be a 1956 reference, another line a 1962 reference. Zappa says, yes, but they're not just references. No, it's not just, quote, now here's one from 1950, unquote. They don't work out that way. So he's juxtaposing like I do with the DJing. He's trying to do fucking Bob DJing, the ultimate gig. And then no one had the ability to achieve radio, provided the digital template for it to be done. In the hours, with no commercials. I just realized he's fucking juxtaposing, or at least the way Miles presents it, he's doing what I'm doing. So then Miles says, I've often wondered, we did this, how much the idea of your music was important. I've often wondered how much the idea of your music was important, because you'll create an evocative musical condition and then break it up before it's had a chance to fully mature or condense, particularly on the numbers which refer to Schoenberg or Stravinsky's influences. Zappa says, well, for one thing, the problem with the Mothers up until now has been sort of a limited musicianship compared with what I wanted them to do. Although they're excellent players, some of the things I asked them to do just turns out to be impossible. So over a period of time, we've been teaching each other how to play different hard things. Some of the things we can get into rhythmically now would be difficult for even the most polished orchestra, and we toss them off like they were nothing, because we start playing at 5/8 and 7/8. We started playing at 5/8 and 7/8 about 3 years ago. Now we can have everybody in the band playing at a different time signature, maintain a constant tempo, or I can conduct the relative speed of each instrument. I can conduct the relative speed of each instrument and make those tempos fluctuate against each other. See, against each other, juxtaposition. We've just developed a lot of weird techniques which probably wouldn't have much commercial potential elsewhere, but in one conglomerate batch labeled the mother's invention, it has a sort of identity, so we're able to earn a living from doing that. But I think I read that before. Let's try to find another part. And, you know, in the article they have a profile of Zappa, and it looks like he's got 19th century clothing on. So he does look like a modern Beethoven. That's how they present him in the article. Okay, so what do we do next? What do you think? What Zappa thing can I come up with? Oh, yeah. Let's play that. Okay. Electric Aunt Jemima. So you look up my list of 1,200 Zappa songs, go down to E, and there's two versions. One in 1969 in Uncle Meat, and then an Acapulco version by the Persuasions. Forget that one. So we make sure that the sound is open. Sound check. Put that up to Soundflower. Volume is up. I think this is it. Did you like that, Evan? How was that?
Well, I think he was showing his disdain for R&B.
No, he's not showing his disdain. He says he's taking the archetypes of that music. He loves the music, and he makes a new alchemy.
Oh, I thought he was talking about how he couldn't stand it, but there was no other place to go. I must have
No, he couldn't stand classical music.
But
he couldn't understand serious classical music. That environment is what he avoided. So he turned doo-wop into classical, a new kind of classical music. He got it totally backwards.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot.
See, you could have, if I hadn't corrected you, you've been walking around the next 20 years upside down. It's good to know
Thank you, Bob.
Actually is going on.
Well, you know what? It's always amazing to me to hear that this kind of music is scripted, that it was composed, and I think it takes a real maverick to bring that forth. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so
Bob, did you play two versions of that, Ange?
Yeah. The second one was by an a cappella group, that means no musical accompaniment, just singing, called the Persuasions, which Zappa discovered at some point back in the 70s or 80s, and he really liked them, so he made albums. They did a lot of his music a cappella.
Wow.
So, you have anything to say? Any requests, Roxy? I brought out my next batch of files, so we go to see what he says to Downbeat magazine in October 1969. We'd like to hear.
Yes.
Let me go to the bathroom. I'm going to play another song, okay?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, I do something?
Yes.
What is this? Is Dwarf Nebula Processional March. Dwarf Nebula, Processional March, 1970, on the album Weasels Rip My Flesh. Well, that was pretty awesome. Hey, talk about violent, aggressive music. What do you think
the name of that, Bob?
Easy Meat. M-E-A-T. Easy Meat.
I liked it. I liked it a lot. No, I appreciate what he does. Yeah.
I mean, that thing was just roaring along.
And, yeah. And that's okay, one that I recognize. I would recognize as
As a what?
I would recognize that as like if I were to hear that somewhere, I'd say, oh yeah, that must be Zappa. Even if I'm not that familiar, it just has that signature.
Right. This is a Downbeat jazz magazine, October 30th, 69. So he's just broken up the Mother's Invention. It's after Woodstock, after the Charles Manson murders. So there's a description. Just read the first part, then get into the interview. It says, the article is by Larry Cart. It says, Frank Zappa, the mother of us all. So he starts off saying, a sage whom I invented once said, quote, the only event which might merit the term progress would be an increase in the percentage of intelligent human beings, unquote. And then the sage added, quote, those who work toward this goal are known variously as fools, clowns, and prophets, unquote. And he says, for purposes of economic gain and protective coloration, Frank Zappa and the Mother's Invention have promoted themselves as a group of truly weird people. That's what we do here at Iondom, right? We do the same thing. We're economic gain and protective coloration. Well, the Mothers may have their eccentricities, but no more than other musicians I have met. And Zappa himself is a man of striking sobriety. Sometimes he even made me feel frivolous. Now he describes the concert a bit. Zappa is standing on stage in front of 10,000 or so people, most of them under 21, at an open-air concert last summer. He says to the audience, quote, we've just had a request for Caravan with a drum solo. And that is the end of the routine on the album Absolutely Free, done in 66. So he has in the brackets, the fruit of their routine on America Drinks and Goes Home. Somebody says, I want to hear Caravan with a drum solo. So Frank says they just did it. Laughter, there's much laughter. Shouts of, yeah! Then Frank says, now, we may play Caravan with a drum solo, or we might refuse to play Caravan with a drum solo. Which will it be? We think we'll let you decide. There's Roxy's participatory angle, unquote. And then the writer says, all of this is delivered in a light, mocking tone of voice. An applause meter type test indicates that the crowd does not want Caravan with a drum solo. So Zappa says, all right, we'll play Wipeout. And in the brackets, the nadir of early 60s schlock, which they proceed to do in 3 tempos at once. The mindless riff of Wipeout. The mindless riff of Wipeout melts like plastic. All right. Zappa begins the second half of the concert by saying, quote, Ian Underwood will now play for you the Mozart Piano Sonata in B-flat, unquote. Underwood begins to play the first movement of a Mozart Piano Sonata, K281, I think. He plays it very well. That. Then it goes into, I asked Zappa about his run-in. Now, remember we were joking a couple weeks ago about the kids in Germany asked him to blow up the NATO Center, or borrow his audience to blow up the NATO Center. Well, he had a run-in at the London School of Economics, and this is in August August 69, we read Miles' interview with him in that month, London School of Economics, or July, August. Now, this article, a few months later, is bringing it up again. I asked Zappa about his run-in at the London School of Economics, and Zappa said, quote, I was invited to speak at the London School of Economics, and I went over there and asked, quote, what do you want me to say? Unquote. So here's a bunch of youthful British leftists who take the same youthful leftist view that is popular the world over. It's like belonging to a car club. The whole leftist mentality. Quote, we want to burn the world down and start all over and go back to nature, unquote. Basing their principles on Marxist doctrine this and Mao Zedong that, and all these cliches that they've read in their classes. And they think that's the basis for conducting a revolution that's going to liberate the common man. Meanwhile, they don't even know any common men. With their mod clothes, either that or the Che Guevara khakis. It's a game. I do not think they will acquire the power to do what they want to do, because I'm positive most of them don't really believe what they're saying. I told them that. I told them that what they were into was just the equivalent of this year's flower power. A couple of years before, those same schmucks were wandering around with incense and bells in the park because they heard that that's what was happening in San Francisco. The first thing they asked me was what was going on at Berkeley. I was thinking to myself, quote, what, you guys want to copy that too? Unquote. It's really depressing to sit in front of a large number of people and have them all be that stupid all at once. And they're in college. So he then goes back to the concert. Zappa introduces the first piece on the concert as, quote, a chamber piece for electric piano and drums. The title, I believe, was Moderato. A chamber piece is exactly what it is. And it says the drum part takes typical rock rhythms, wham, bang, and whamma, bam, bam, and stretches the space between beats. The result is a series of percussive timbres suspended over a void. The music verges on the Hollywood sinister, in brackets, background for some awful invisible monster, predicting Ion, end of bracket, but the close interaction between the two players, at times each seems to be imitating the other's part, gives the piece an extravagant formal vigor. Are you guys okay with this? Are you learning?
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So now it goes into the formal interview itself. Zappa, like most moralists, is pessimistic about people in the mass. Perhaps he even wants to punish them. The rest of the group seems considerably more optimistic, and occasionally there are good-natured clashes of will. So then he quotes Zappa. All those mediocre groups reap a huge profit because people really like what they do. The more mediocre your music is, the more accessible it is to a larger number of people in the United States. That's where the market is. You're not selling to a bunch of jazz aesthetes in Europe. You're selling to Americans who really hate music and love entertainment. So there is distinguishing music from entertainment. So the closer your product is to mindless entertainment material, escapist material, the better off you're going to be. People will dump a lot of money into a bunch of young pretty boys who are ready to make music of limited artistic merit so long as they can sell a lot of it. The journalist says, what about your gestures of contempt towards your audience? I think this is what Eben asked about. What about your gestures of contempt towards your audience? Zappa says, I don't think the typical rock fan is smart enough to know he's been dumped on, so it doesn't make any difference. Those kids wouldn't know music if it came up and bit them on the ass, especially in terms of a live concert where the main element is visual. Kids go to see in italics. Kids go to see their favorite acts, not to hear them. We work on the premise that nobody really hears what we do anyway. See, just like here. Nobody hears what we're saying. Nobody understands it. He's ionic there. We work on the premise that nobody really hears what we do anyway, so it doesn't make any difference if we play a place that's got ugly acoustics. The best responses we get from an audience are when we do our worst material. The best responses we get from an audience are when we do our worst material. So Don Preston seems to be part of the interview. Don Preston's a guy who changed John Coltrane. Don Preston says, oh, how can you say that? He directs that at Frank. You know, he objects to what Frank's saying. Zappa says, it's true, man. Louie brings down the house every time. Don Preston, people were booing the last time you played that. One guy wanted Louie, so you said, okay, we'll play Louie. And there was a big boo. Zappa says, maybe they were booing because we didn't play Midnight Hour instead. The journalist says, isn't it difficult to function as musicians when you feel that no one is listening? Don Preston, I don't feel that way. So this is a unique interview. You got an argument happening right within the mothers in the interview. Zappa, I think most of the members of the group are very optimistic that everybody hears and adores what they do on stage. I can't take that point of view. I get really bummed out about it. Because I've talked to them, the audiences, and I know how dumb they are. It's pathetic. Now Frank is thinking he's going to break up the band like about 2 days later. And in Pauline Butcher's book on Zappa, she gives some stories about Frank was really down in like July, August, 69. So Don Preston either knows what's going to happen or he doesn't, but he's trying to keep it together so he can have a gig. So he's trying to tell Frank not to be so depressed. How's this for a musician magazine? You don't have people having arguments about how dumb everybody is when a musician gets interviewed and downbeat. They're going to praise the... Yeah. You say you're going to Payday?
I'm taking my band. Bye. You are so boring.
Yes. Oh, you're talking about us. Are you talking about our band? Us here, right now?
Yeah, most of the time.
Not that bad. But, okay, this is funny. I mean, I haven't read this in 40 years. This is 1969. And there's an argument. But it's right before the breakup. But they don't know that Zappa's going to break up a couple days later. So, what, Roxy?
Nothing, but I agree. You have to move on. When, the music is not stimulating anymore, and everything is fucked up. Time
right. So I've been known to say that here. You guys are a bunch of fucking dummies. You're pathetic. You're so fucking dumb. You can't even ask Ian a question. You've heard me rant on more Frank Zappa anticipating Iandom. He's actually acting out what we actually say here. Right? We're actually proving our thesis that Zappa does anticipate Iandom. We're actually proving it. We've now done before the show we've done 113 hours. Well, now we're getting up to like 120 hours, man. We must be going for about 7 hours, right? But, Roxy, are you saying that we are a band and you're quitting? Is that what you're saying right now? You have to move on? We're not boring. This is your baby, this Zappa thing. This Zappa thing is boring? You suddenly bored with Zappa? Come on.
No.
Uh-oh.
Okay, good. Yeah, you were just imitating Frank. So Don Preston, Zappa says, I've talked to the audiences, and I know how dumb they are. No, it isn't. Nobody can leave. Once you're a member of Payday, especially a co-creating participant, you can't leave Payday. Okay. Anyways, well, you're still here, and you're employed, so you must perform now, even though it is your last day. You must work. You can't quit till the day's over. And you lost every argument. You're arguing that you want to go leave Payday, and Eben slayed you. She proved that you were wrong. Bert proved you were wrong. I proved wrong. You're leaving on false premises. You lost the argument. You have to stay. How could you decide that you could leave after the last few hours of what we've demonstrated, how exciting you are as a member of the group? See?
I lost my motivation.
Press Don. You've lost your motivation.